When you open a new workbook, the active cell is always cell A1. You can use the mouse to click into any cell to make it the active cell. You can also use the keyboard to move the active cell cursor. There are many ways to move the active cell quickly with the keyboard. Let's review a list of the typical keyboard strokes and their corresponding movements in regard to the active cell. First, you can use the up arrow key to move the active cell up one cell. You can use the down arrow key to move the active cell down one cell. You can use the right arrow key to move the active cell one cell to the right. Use the left arrow key to move the active cell left one cell. You can use the page down key to move the active cell down one page. You can use the page up key to move the active cell up one page. You can use the Alt plus page down key to move the active cell one page to the right. You can use Alt plus the page up key to move the active cell to the left one page. You can use Control plus Home to move the active cell into the upper left corner. You can use Control plus End to move the cell into the lower right cell as far out as data entry has occurred within the worksheet. The Tab key is used to move the active cell one cell to the right. Shift plus the Tab key is used to move the active cell one cell to the left. The Enter key is used to move the active cell down one cell, and Shift plus the Enter key is used to move the active cell up one cell. In Excel, any combination of numbers and letters entered into a cell will be treated as a text entry, not a numeric entry. Text entries will default to using a left alignment in the cells into which they are entered. As you enter information into a cell, remember that you must leave the cell to finish entry. If you look in the status bar, you will notice Excel will go into enter mode as you enter information into a blank cell and will not return to the ready mode until you have moved to a new cell. This is a very common problem for new Excel users. Many new users enter information into a cell and then go to modify it in some way without leaving the cell, only to find that there aren't very many commands available for use while Excel remains in enter mode. Also note that long text entries will appear to spill over into the next cell to the right only if the next cell to the right is blank. If you move into the next cell to the right and begin typing, the previous cell's entry will appear as if it has been cut off by the entry that you made to the right of your original long text entry. Don't worry, it hasn't. Excel just can't display all of the text that was entered into the first cell, so it truncates the display. If you click the original cell and then look into the formula bar, the true entry will still be displayed there, so you really haven't lost any data entry. However, you will probably want it to display in the worksheet correctly for printing. You can only do that by widening the column in which the original entry was made. We will examine resizing columns and rows in a later chapter. For now, it is just useful to note that what is displayed in a worksheet may not be exactly what the cell contains. In Excel, for a cell to be considered a numeric entry, it can only contain digits and decimals. There can be no text in numeric entries. Ideally, you should enter numbers in a plain and raw format, that is, without any formatting like dollar signs. A helpful tip is just enter the digits and decimals. All number signs, commas, and other numeric formatting can be added later on when you format the cells. This relates back to the concept of cell contents versus cell display that arose in the previous lesson. In this case, you don't want commas and other punctuation possibly being misplaced when the data entry occurs. For example, a comma that is misplaced into the incorrect position within a cell will cause the cell to be interpreted as a text entry by Excel. Obviously, that can be very problematic, often interfering with numeric calculations. Note that you can type a minus sign in front of a number to designate a negative value during data entry. However, you should save any advanced formatting of negative values for later when you apply formatting to the cells in your worksheet. Numeric cell entries also have some additional issues with the concept of cell contents versus cell display. In the same way that Excel will truncate long text entries, Excel will often turn the display of long numeric text entries into pound signs. If extremely long, they may instead become expressed in scientific notation. This stems from the same problem that we had with our long text entries. The numeric entry is too long to be displayed correctly in the column. If the number appears as pound signs, then you can simply widen your column to fix the display. If the display turns to scientific notation, however, you cannot fix its display by simply widening the column. In that case, you must select the cell and force a new number formatting. For example, you could click the comma style button that appears in the number button group on the home tab of the ribbon to add thousands separators to the value, forcing the display of the cell out of its default scientific notation display. At that time, however, it may just appear as the pound sign display. If that is the case, you can fix the display by simply resizing the column within which you typed the long number entry. Excel contains a handy feature called AutoComplete that can help speed up repetitive text entries within columns. If you have a column of unbroken text entries, meaning that there are no empty cells in the column, Excel will offer to fill in the next entry that you make at the bottom of the column as you type your entries down the column. For example, if you were listing people by departments in your company, you would have a column of departments that would probably contain duplicate departmental entries within the column. With the autocomplete feature, when Excel notices the first few letters of a repeating entry being typed, it will try to finish the entry for you by displaying its suggestion in a black highlight. If that is what you want to type, then just press the Enter key on your keyboard to accept the suggestion. If, however, it is not what you wanted to type, then just keep typing and the suggestion will go away. Excel contains another handy little feature called Pick from Drop-Down List that can speed up repetitive text entry in columns. If you have a column of unbroken text entries, meaning that there are no empty cells in the column, Excel can display a drop-down menu of the previous text entries within that column from which you can pick. That way you won't have to retype duplicate entries and risk misspelling them. To do this, simply right-click the cell at the end of the unbroken column of text entries and choose the Pick from Drop-Down List command from the pop-up menu that appears. A list of all the prior entries in that column will be shown in alphabetical order, and you can just click the one that you'd like to enter into the cell. Starting in Excel 2013, you can use the Flash Fill feature to automatically fill in values within a column with information entered into an adjacent column. This feature is most useful when dealing with data that has a consistent data entry pattern in the column whose values are referenced by the second Flash Filled column. For example, if you had a column that contained the first and last name of employees, you could enter the last name of an employee into the adjacent column and then use Flash Fill to fill in the corresponding values of all of the last names of the employees within the column. This can greatly reduce your dependence on text parsing formulas within Excel. To flash fill a column of information, click into a cell within a column that is next to or contiguous to the column that contains the data you want to retrieve. Next, enter the data value to extract from the adjacent cell into the cell within the column that you want to flash fill. Next, click into the next cell above or below the cell into which you entered the value, and then press either Ctrl+E on your keyboard, or click the Data tab in the ribbon, and then click the Flash Fill button in the Data Tools button group. Excel should then extract all of the corresponding data values from the adjacent column to fill in the cells within the current column. Note that when using the Flash Fill feature, the data column that is referenced can be non-adjacent as long as there is contiguous column data between the column that is flash filled and the referenced column. Basically, this means that you cannot have an empty or blank column between the column that is being flash filled and the column whose values are being referenced. In this case, Excel will display a message box that informs you that it cannot find a pattern in the adjacent data. Another interesting point to note about using Flash Fill is that it references the casing of the entry that you make within the flash filled column and repeats your pattern when filling in the remaining values. For example, if you had an adjacent cell with the value of John Doe and then entered lowercase doe into the next column for the flash fill entry, all of the other flash-filled values would also use all lowercase last name entries. So it is worth noting that flash-fill is case-sensitive and can be used to change the casing of referenced values in the flash-filled column. Another point to note is that flash fill works best when referencing values that have a consistent pattern of data entry. For example, if you are referencing values within a column where some names have a prefix and some have a middle name and some have a suffix, flash fill may parse the incorrect information from the fields that it references when it fills in the column's values. So be sure to double check the values that are returned by the flash fill feature. If this is the case, you can undo or delete the entries made by the flash fill feature, and then try to use the traditional text parsing functions within Excel to extract the needed values instead. Note that after you flash fill a column, a small icon appears next to the values that were entered. You can click the drop-down arrow on this icon to display a menu of choices. You can select the Undo Flash Fill command to undo an unsuccessful flash fill attempt. You can select the Accept Suggestions command to accept the flash fill changes. You can select the Select Blank Cells and Select Changed Cells commands to select the blank cells or changed cells within the flash fill column. Many features of Excel are dependent upon making a reference to a group of cells. In Excel, a group of cells is called a range. Ranges are used in many ways in Excel. For example, you may have a column of sales figures. Using a formula, you could refer to the range of all cells in that column and add them together to find the total sales. This is just one example of how you use ranges within Excel. Note that you can also make references to either a single range or to multiple ranges. Multiple ranges can be adjacent, overlapping, or completely separate from one another. To make a range reference, which is a critical aspect of writing formulas, you individually identify each range by its upper left cell address and lower right cell address, separated by a colon symbol. For example, to refer to the range of cells from cell A2 through A5, you would write A2 colon A5. To refer to multiple cell ranges simultaneously, you simply separate the references with a comma. For example, if you wanted to make a reference to the cell range A2 through A5 and the cell range B1 through F1, you would write A1 colon A5 comma B1 colon F1 to refer to both ranges simultaneously. This can be very helpful when writing formulas. While you need to know how to write a range reference when creating formulas, you will also need to be able to select ranges of cells with your mouse or keyboard for other purposes such as formatting cells and performing ranged data entry. When a single cell range is selected within a worksheet, it will appear with a border around all of its selected cells. The selected cells will appear highlighted. The column and row headings of the cells that have been selected will also appear highlighted. The active cell within the range will appear as a normal white cell, but will be encased within the border. As always, when performing data entry, the cell entry will be made in the active cell. A range will stay selected until you click into another cell or move your active cell with the keyboard arrows. That will deselect the cell range. You can also give a name to a cell range that you use frequently. This can make the function of the range appear more clearly when used in formulas, as you can substitute the name of the range in place of the range reference. You can select a range using either your keyboard, your mouse, or a combination of both. To select a range with your keyboard, simply select any cell that you want to set as one of the four corner cells in the range. Then hold down the Shift key on your keyboard, and then press the keyboard arrows to extend the range in whichever direction you prefer until it is the size you want. Finally, release the Shift key on your keyboard. To select a range with your mouse, simply click and drag from one corner of the cell range to the opposite corner of the cell range. You can also quickly select a range by using a combination of both your mouse and keyboard. To do this, click the cell that you want to set as the upper left corner of your cell range. Then press and hold down the Shift key on your keyboard. Then click the cell that you want to set as the lower right corner cell in your range. You can also select multiple non-adjacent ranges in much the same way that you select individual ranges. However, you must use the Control key on your keyboard in conjunction with your mouse to do this. This is very useful for simultaneously manipulating data in two different sections. For example, if you wanted to bold the cells in two separate ranges, you could select both ranges first and then click the bold button. To select multiple ranges, simply use your mouse to select the first range. Next, hold down the Control key on your keyboard, and then use your mouse to create the additional ranges. Finally, release the Control key on your keyboard. Make sure that you don't move the active cell by clicking your mouse without holding down the Control key or by using the arrow keys, or you will deselect all of the ranges that you have made in your worksheet. Once you have a cell range selected, you can easily enter new information into the selected range of cells. Notice that there is one cell within the selected range that is white. That cell is the active cell within the cell range or ranges. You can enter information into this cell. You can then move to the next cell within the range or ranges by pressing either the Tab key to move to the right or the Enter key to move down. Holding down the Shift key and then pressing either of those two keys will move the active cell cursor in the opposite direction of its normal movement. Once the active cell cursor comes to the lower right cell within a range, it will move to the next available range or back to the top of the first range, still staying within the ranges as long as they remain selected. AutoFill is a feature that allows Excel to automatically fill in a repeating pattern that you establish. For instance, you could fill in the months of the year, days of the week, or any repeating numerical pattern. To do this, first select the cell or cells that establish the pattern. Next, look for the fill handle in the lower right corner of the selected cell or cells. It is a small square in the lower right corner of any active cell or cell range. Move the cell selection cursor, meaning the white chunky cross icon, towards this box and try to fit the upper left corner of the cross up into the lower right corner of the cell or cell range where the fill handle is located. When the cursor is in place, it will turn into a thin black cross. This is the AutoFill cursor. Now just click and drag the handle out either horizontally or vertically to fill in the selected range. As long as the selected cell contains the beginning of a pattern that Excel recognizes, it will fill in the range with the rest of that pattern. The names of the rest of the pattern will appear in a screen tip as you click and drag over each cell. If Excel doesn't recognize the entry in the initial cell or cell range as establishing a pattern, it will simply copy the first cell's contents into the rest of the cells that you select. Actually, this is very handy if you simply want to copy the same cell entry over a range of cells. Excel will also recognize patterns that you establish. For instance, if you typed 2 into a cell and then 4 into the next cell and selected both as a range, you could drag out the rest of the pattern, which would be increasing by 2. After you click and drag the AutoFill handle, you may see the AutoFill Options tag appear next to your selection. If Excel did not establish a pattern or establish the incorrect pattern, you can click this button and then choose the Fill Series option or one of the other available options to force Excel to try and recognize the pattern that you select. This may occur if you initially selected an ambiguous cell value, such as the number 1 as your starting cell value, for example. In this case, Excel will default to simply copying the value. You can click the AutoFill Options Smart tag and then choose the Fill Series option to change the copied value to values that increment by 1. This can also occur when using date values. If Excel doesn't choose the desired method of incrementation for the date values, you can often choose the desired method from the AutoFill Options Smart tag.